The morning in Seattle was overcast and cool. A light drizzle filled the air with crispness, and gray clouds hung low over the skyscrapers, blocking out the sun. Kyle Peterson, a 33-year-old cloud engineer, woke up well before his alarm went off. He quietly got out of bed so as not to wake his sleeping wife and walked into the kitchen. The apartment, located on the top floor of a modern apartment complex, was spacious and stylishly furnished. Light walls, panoramic windows with a view of the city, expensive appliances, all this was part of the luxury he tried to provide for his wife Bree. Kyle turned on the coffee machine and, as usual, began to make himself a latte without sugar. While the machine was making noise, grinding beans, he briefly thought about the day ahead. Working at a tech company was demanding. Today, he had important calls and infrastructure set up for a new client. Kyle knew that to maintain the lifestyle Bree wanted, he had to work hard. He rarely took vacations and often stayed late at the office. He enjoyed his work, but sometimes he felt tired, relieved only by the thought that his efforts were making his wife happy. He quietly stirred the coffee and poured it into a tall ceramic mug. Then he peered cautiously into the bedroom. Bree was still asleep, covered with a fluffy blanket. The light from the slightly open door fell on her blonde hair, spread out on the pillow. She looked serene and beautiful, just like in the photos she posted on her Instagram. At such moments, Kyle felt that all his efforts were not in vain. He smiled at the corners of his lips and closed the door, deciding to let her sleep a little longer. After a breakfast of avocado toast and egg, he dressed in his usual dark jeans and blue shirt. Before leaving, Kyle left a note on the table. "Good morning, honey. I made you coffee. Have a nice day." He always tried to show concern even in small things. He knew how much Bree loved waking up to the smell of fresh coffee. The note was a small tradition that he thought made his wife happy. Kyle stepped outside his apartment and took in the cool morning air. He usually drove to work in his black Tesla, which he'd bought a year ago, largely at Bree's request. She liked being in the frame next to a premium electric car. As he rode the elevator down to the garage, he scrolled through his phone and glanced at Instagram. There was a fresh photo on his wife's page, a beautifully served breakfast with fresh berries and yogurt, captioned, "The morning you're loved." Kyle smiled slightly when he saw that she'd posted a photo of the breakfast he'd made her the day before on the weekend. He liked the idea that she appreciated his thoughtfulness with such posts. Starting the car, he adjusted the GPS and pulled out onto the morning highway. The clock only showed 7:15, but the traffic was already heavy. Sitting in the cozy cabin of the Tesla and listening to soft instrumental music to concentrate, Kyle thought about his plans for the day. Tonight, barring a rush, he hoped to get home early and spend time with Bree. Maybe go out to dinner or just watch a movie together. They hadn't been able to make time for each other much lately. Work was consuming him, and Bree was busy with her own things. Kyle parked at the office, grabbed his leather briefcase with his laptop in it from the trunk, and headed inside. The large open office greeted him with the familiar hum of server fans and the quiet conversations of his colleagues. He said hello to a few of them, changed his jacket into a business suit, and sat down at his desk. Notifications of new emails were already flashing on his computer screen. He took a sip of cooling coffee from a thermos and dove into work, once again mentally promising himself that he would definitely get off work in time for an evening with his wife. That evening, at about 7 o'clock, Kyle actually managed to get free in time and hurried home. He had booked a table in advance at their favorite restaurant on the waterfront to arrange a small surprise for Bree. Having arrived at the house, he went up to his floor, anticipating a quiet evening together. However, when he opened the door to the apartment, he felt a strange emptiness. The hallway was dark, only the LED lighting along the floor softly illuminated the way. Usually, Bree would already be home at this time, cooking or at least turning on the light. Kyle called quietly, "Bree, I'm home." There was silence. He walked into the kitchen. The countertop was littered with dinner dishes. The sink was full of unwashed plates. This surprised him. Bree was usually neat, especially when she knew he was coming. There was a crumpled note stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Kyle took it down and unfolded it. The scrap of paper had been hastily scrawled. Out on business, don't wait up. Call later. He felt a little disappointed. He had been so looking forward to spending time together today, and Bree wasn't even home and didn't seem to be coming back for dinner. Kyle sighed and looked at the messy kitchen. Pulling himself together, he decided to tidy everything up. While he washed the dishes and wiped down the table, his mind was spinning with thoughts. What kind of business could his wife have had tonight? She hadn't mentioned it beforehand. Suddenly, his phone started ringing, breaking him out of his thoughts. The name Bree appeared on the display. Kyle quickly wiped his hands and answered. Hello, dear. Where are you? There was music and voices in the background. It seemed she was not alone. Oh, Kyle, hi. Bree's voice was a little tense. I met a friend. You go have dinner without me, okay? Kyle felt a stab of disappointment, but tried to hide it in his voice. I understand. I just got free early, wanted to surprise you booked a restaurant. Oh well, another time, he tried to smile, although she did not see it. Restaurant? She asked, shouting over the noise. Oh, sorry, dear. Another time, though. Today is no good. I didn't expect my friend to show up. There was a muffled chuckle from someone next to her. Kyle tensed. He wanted to ask where exactly she was, but decided against it. He didn't want to seem suspicious or jealous. Bree had always valued trust and freedom in a relationship. He took a deep breath. Okay, have fun. Just don't stay too long, okay? It'll be late. Don't worry, everything is fine. Kisses, see you home. She hung up before he could respond. Kyle was left standing in the middle of the kitchen, phone in hand. His chest hurt unpleasantly. Bree had never done that before. Usually, she was delighted by surprises and tried to spend evenings together, but now she seemed to be avoiding his company. He put his phone away and finished tidying up. Not wanting to waste the evening, he sat down at his laptop and immersed himself in reading work emails. Fortunately, there were always plenty of them. But his thoughts kept returning to his wife. Something in her voice, and especially that laughter in the background, was haunting him. A friend? What friend? He knew almost all of her close friends, and they rarely went out to bars on weekdays. Later, around 11, the front door slammed. Kyle, who had been dozing on the couch with his laptop on his lap, woke up and looked at his watch. Bree was back. He stood up to greet her. She was swaying on her heels, slightly tipsy. Hello, he said quietly. How are you? Fine. Bree avoided his gaze, unbuttoning her coat. I'm kind of tired. I want to sleep. She smelled of someone else's perfume and wine. Kyle noted the strange aroma clearly, not her own perfume, but a masculine note of cologne. His heart ached unpleasantly, but again he said nothing. Aren't you hungry? I could warm something up. No, no need, she waved it off. We had a snack. Thank you. Bree walked past him tiredly into the bedroom. A few minutes later, Kyle followed. His wife had already gone to bed, facing the wall. The screen of her phone on her nightstand flickered, but she quickly turned it over, hiding it from his view. For a second, in the silence that followed, Kyle thought he heard the vibration of an incoming message. He realized that anxiety was growing inside him. A week passed. The relationship between Kyle and Bree had become noticeably colder. They still lived under the same roof, but it was as if they existed in different worlds. Kyle still left for work early and returned late, and Bree had almost ceased to be interested in his affairs. Their conversations were limited to the routine exchange of phrases. How are you? Everything is fine. They both understood that something was wrong, but the conversation was postponed day after day. One Saturday, when Kyle finally had a day off without urgent calls, he decided to have a romantic breakfast. Waking up early, he made his signature pancakes with berries and whipped cream and brewed aromatic tea. Bree came down around 10, sleepy, but still impressive in a silk robe. Seeing the set table, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Oh, are we celebrating? She asked, perching on a high bar stool at the kitchen island. There was something like sarcasm in her voice. I wanted to spend the morning with you, Kyle replied softly, handing her a plate of pancakes. We haven't had breakfast together in a long time. Bree nodded lazily, picking up her fork. She snapped a few pictures of the plate with her phone before she touched it. Kyle watched as she posted a story, the filter making it look even more delicious. The caption read, "Weekend morning." No mention of who made it. "I was thinking maybe we could go somewhere today," he suggested cautiously. "Out into nature or into the city, take a walk. It's been a long time since we've spent time together." Bree looked at him with a hint of embarrassment as she chewed her pancake. "Today, I actually have plans, Kyle." "What are your plans?" he asked, trying to keep a calm tone. She put down her fork as if about to explain the obvious. "I promised the boss I'd help out at an open house. Remember the doctor I told you about? You know, the plastic surgeon, Jake Blake. He was looking for a house, and we're showing him a couple of options today. A very important client needs to be there." Kyle remembered. A few days ago, she had mentioned in passing some wealthy doctor who had come to their agency. He hadn't liked the way she had described the new client, but he had pushed the jealous thoughts away. Now the unpleasant feeling of jealousy was stirring again. "I understand, work is work," he sighed. "And after the show, maybe we can have dinner tonight." Bree shrugged and reached for a cup of tea. "I'm not sure. Maybe after the show, my colleagues, the client, and I will have dinner if everything goes well. This is normal practice, you know." Kyle knew that things like that did happen in real estate, socializing with clients, networking. But it still scratched at him that she preferred the company of her coworkers and this doctor to an evening with her husband. He suppressed his irritation and nodded. "Okay, then tomorrow, maybe we can go somewhere together." "We'll see tomorrow, okay?" she answered evasively and stood up from the table, barely touching her breakfast. "I still need to get ready. I'm leaving in an hour." Kyle watched her slender figure disappear into the bedroom. He felt abandoned. Bree had been so willing to accept his proposals before, but now it seemed that any plans together were the last thing on her mind. He sat down at the table and, having lost his appetite, began mechanically finishing his cold pancakes. A little later, when Bree was about to leave, he decided to talk anyway. She came out of the bedroom in an elegant business suit and high heels, looking impeccable. Kyle noticed that she had made a special effort, a new silk top, a subtle scent of expensive perfume. She usually dressed like this only for important meetings. "You look gorgeous," he tried to smile. "Isn't it a bit too formal for a house show?" "The client is special," she said briefly, adjusting her earring. "I want to make an impression." He didn't immediately find what to answer. Bree looked at him carefully for the first time that morning. "Why are you so gloomy? Everything is fine, right, Kyle?" she asked with a hint of irritation. "Yeah, it's okay," he echoed, looking down. "I just miss you. We haven't been spending much time together lately." Bree rolled her eyes. "You yourself are constantly at work, and when I have my own things to do or meetings, you suddenly don't like it. It's not fair." "That's not what I mean. I understand that you have your own work, friends. It's just, it seems like we're drifting apart, and it worries me." She sighed, checking the contents of her bag. "Don't get worked up, please. Everything is fine. I have to go." Bree kissed him on the cheek, more out of inertia than feeling, and headed for the door. Kyle stood in the living room, a vague uneasiness stirring in his soul. He glanced at the wedding photo hanging on the wall. He and Bree were smiling, beaming with happiness. It seemed like another life. That day, Bree returned late after Kyle had already fallen asleep, and their conversation never took place. A tense silence settled firmly in the house, distancing them further with each passing day. Kyle increasingly found himself thinking hard thoughts. Bree's behavior gave more and more reasons for doubt. She stayed late at work, came home irritated, or, on the contrary, too cheerful, clearly under the impression of time spent outside the house. At the same time, she almost stopped looking for intimacy. Their intimate life had come to naught in recent weeks. Bree reacted coldly to any cautious attempts by Kyle to kiss or hug her, citing fatigue or mood. One evening, when Kyle returned from work, he found his wife in the bedroom in front of a large mirror. Bree, dressed up, with her hair and makeup done, was taking pictures of herself on her phone. The room smelled of her expensive perfume. Outfit options were scattered everywhere. She didn't hear her husband enter and continued posing. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked calmly, trying not to show the irritation that had washed over him at her leaving again. Bree jumped in surprise and turned around. "Oh my God, you scared me." She frowned, but quickly changed her expression to normal. "Yes, today is an event for work. Remember, I told you, at our agency we conduct networking for clients and partners." Kyle vaguely remembered something like that, but wasn't sure if this was the same thing. He nodded. Bree returned to the mirror, adjusting her earring. "Am I too late? Maybe I should come with you?" he suddenly suggested, realizing that he hadn't thought about it beforehand. His wife looked at him through the reflection, raising her eyebrows. "Why? It's for work. You don't know anyone there, and I'll probably be busy chatting with everyone. I just wanted to spend time with you, even if it was at an event," he answered quietly. "Kyle, seriously," Bree turned to him. "It'll be boring for people outside the industry. All they'll talk about is real estate. You'll only get tired. You should rest at home, okay?" Her refusal sounded convincing, but Kyle noticed a hint of worry in his wife's eyes when he suggested they go together. He felt an uneasy suspicion. What if there was no formal event? He didn't argue, though. Bree quickly finished packing, put on an elegant black dress, and called a taxi. She waved goodbye from the door. "Don't expect me to be early." Kyle nodded in response. When the door closed, he walked into the bedroom, where the scent of her perfume still lingered, and looked around. Expensive lipstick lay on the vanity, along with makeup brushes scattered about. He sank down on the edge of the bed, feeling helpless. A voice inside him was telling him that something bad was happening, but he lacked the courage, or perhaps the desire, to admit it. His gaze accidentally fell on the screen of Bree's smartphone left on the bed. The phone blinked, notifying of a new message. Kyle froze. He never allowed himself to read her correspondence, respecting her personal space. But now his heart was pounding wildly, and his fingers seemed to reach for the device on their own. The screen was still on, not having time to lock, opening the latest messages. On the display was a messenger application and a text from a contact signed with a simple name, Jake. The message read, "I'll be waiting for you at the bar at 8. Don't be late, beautiful." Kyle's eyes darkened. He read the phrase over and over again. His insides went cold. This was clearly not a dry business invitation to an official evening. Flirting, and even with that same doctor, the client. And she went to him. His hands began to shake. Kyle stood up, feeling the rush of adrenaline give way to a devastating heaviness. Memories flashed through his mind. Bree staying late, smiling at her phone. All the pieces of the puzzle came together. Cheating. He had been so sure of her love just a short time ago. The nights they first moved in together, the surprises she threw for his birthday, the way she looked at him with love at the altar at their wedding. Had it all been a lie from the start, or had she changed over time? He exhaled slowly, trying to clear his head. Anger warred with pain. Part of him wanted to follow her into that bar and see for himself, and part of him hoped that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But the messages on his phone were real. Later that night, when Bree returned, Kyle was already awake. He lay in the dark, pretending to be asleep, and heard her creep quietly into the bedroom. The smell of expensive alcohol and that same foreign perfume hit him unpleasantly in the nose. Bree quickly undressed and lay down, trying not to touch her husband. She thought he was asleep, but he lay with his eyes closed, feeling how everything inside him burned with humiliation and anger. Now he had almost no doubt. His wife was cheating on him. The hotel bar where Bree came was luxurious and intimate. Subdued lighting, soft jazz music, the glitter of bottles behind the bar. She noticed Jake immediately, a tall, trim man of about 40 in an expensive dark blue suit, sitting at a table in the corner. When he saw her, he smiled a snow-white smile, stood up and gallantly helped her take off her coat. "Bree, you look stunning," he said. his gaze sliding over her figure-flattering black dress. "I'm glad you made it out." "Hi, Jake," she smiled a little shyly, sitting down. "It's nice to see you too. Managed to find some time." He sat down opposite, signaling to the waiter. Almost immediately, they were brought 2 glasses of champagne. "To a wonderful evening," Jake raised his glass slightly. "To the meeting," she continued, their glasses clinking loudly. Bree felt a pleasant thrill. She was flattered by the attention of this confident, wealthy man. She had missed the compliments and the lightness of flirtation over the past months. Kyle was immersed in work and rarely noticed her new dresses or hair, and Jake had showered her with attention from the very first day they met. He was her client, but gradually the conversation went beyond business. Harmless jokes, innocent touches of the hand when meeting, all this added up to what brought her here this evening. They talked, laughing and not noticing how time flies. Jake told interesting stories from his practice as a plastic surgeon, funny cases with works. Bree felt special next to him. He looked into her eyes, asked questions about her life, admired her achievements on Instagram. In a couple of hours, she managed to get slightly drunk, not so much from champagne, but from his attention and gallantry. "You know, I haven't met a girl as bright as you in a long time," Jake said quietly as they moved to the sofa against the wall, sitting closer to each other. "Your husband is a lucky man. I hope he appreciates you as much as he should." Bree looked away for a moment. The topic of her husband left her feeling a little guilty, but also irritated. She shrugged, pretending not to care. "He has a lot of work. Sometimes I miss his attention, of course." Jake nodded understandingly and dared to place his hand on her knee. "Such beauties should not be bored alone. If you were with me, I would carry you in my arms." Bree smiled at the compliment. The champagne was dulling her conscience. She covered his hand with hers. "Jake, we shouldn't," she began, but her voice sounded uncertain. He interrupted her gently. "I think there's something between us. I've felt it since our first meeting, don't you?" She looked into his eyes, dark and serious. Her heart began to pound. Of course she had felt the attraction, but she had tried to convince herself it was just flirting. The line seemed blurred now. She didn't answer, but Jake didn't need words. He leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was intense and passionate. Bree froze for a moment, then closed her eyes and responded. She thought, "What am I doing?" But her body responded to his every touch. She hadn't felt so desired in a long time. Jake wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. Bree forgot about everything: the bar patrons, her doubts, her husband back home. There was only this moment. After a while, they found themselves in Jake's room, which he had rented in the same hotel on the top floor. They had barely closed the door behind them when they were kissing again. Jake pulled off his jacket, throwing it on the chair, and began to unzip Bree's dress. She didn't object, on the contrary. Her hands had already slid under his shirt, feeling his hot skin. Her clothes fell to the floor one by one. Jake kissed her hungrily. His kisses became bolder. His breathing became ragged. Bree's heart pounded in her chest. At that moment, desire drowned out the voice of conscience. She felt the wall behind her. He pressed her against the wall. His breathing quickened. He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked hoarsely, although he himself was barely holding back. In response, Bree pulled him toward her, capturing his lips again. Words were unnecessary. They moved toward the bed, falling onto the soft covers. When it was all over, Bree lay on Jake's chest, catching her breath. He played with a strand of her hair, grinning. "This is such a work meeting." She snorted and sat up, looking at her scattered clothes. The clock on the nightstand showed 11:30 at night. Bree pulled the sheet back over herself, suddenly feeling ashamed. It had all happened too easily. It was as if she had been replaced today. Thoughts of her husband tentatively pierced the veil of dying passion. I have to go," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed and starting to gather her clothes. Jake touched her back gently. "Already? Stay until the morning." Bree shook her head. "No, I can't. He's waiting at home. If I don't come back, it's all complicated." He frowned but nodded without insisting. A few minutes later, Bree was dressed, though she felt like she was in pieces. Jake gave her a big hug and a kiss on the cheek as they said goodbye. "I want to see you again," he whispered. "Soon." Bree said nothing, just smiled weakly and slipped out the door. In the elevator, going down, she rested her forehead on the cold mirror. Her heart was still pounding, but now it was mixed with bitterness. She had betrayed Kyle. How could she look him in the eyes? But the memory of Jake's hot embrace stirred a spark of excitement inside her again. Bree closed her eyes. Was that the only time? Or is there no stopping? Flashed through her mind. That night, she returned home well after midnight, sneaking past the living room. Kyle seemed to be asleep. Bree let out a sigh of relief and lay down on her bed, turning away carefully. She didn't want to think about what would happen tomorrow. She just hoped her husband hadn't noticed. The days dragged on painfully. Kyle barely spoke to his wife, and she seemed in no hurry to explain anything. After that night at the bar, Bree continued to act as if nothing had happened between them. She still left in the morning, came back late. Sometimes she justified it by work. Sometimes she did not bother to explain at all. Kyle felt that he could no longer live in uncertainty. He was exhausted by sleepless nights and suspicions that had almost grown into certainty. Now he wanted proof so that there was no doubt left. One Wednesday at dinner, which was, as usual, almost silent, Kyle put down his fork and, gathering his courage, said, "I have to fly to San Francisco this weekend for a work conference. I fly out on Friday evening. I'll be back on Sunday." Bree looked up from her phone. For a moment, he thought he saw relief, even joy, in her eyes. But she quickly hid it behind a neutral mask. "Oh, I see. Well, it was a good flight," she said in an even tone. "What kind of conference is this?" Kyle had come up with a legend in advance. A seminar for cloud engineers to discuss new technologies. "I was literally told yesterday that I needed to replace a colleague. It happened unexpectedly." "Okay. Well, work is work." She shrugged and went back to her phone. Not a drop of disappointment, not a hint that she would miss him. Kyle felt bitter, but he said nothing. In fact, there was no business trip. On Friday evening, pretending to go to the airport, he packed a small bag and said goodbye to his wife at the door. Bree gave him a formal kiss on the cheek and didn't even look at him, hurrying back to her business. Sitting in the car in the parking lot, Kyle saw through the living room window how she, passing by, was already talking to someone on the phone in an animated voice. Probably to him, to Jake. His heart sank painfully. He didn't go to the airport, but to his colleague and old friend Mark, who lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of the city. Mark was one of the few people Kyle trusted. He was surprised by the late call, but agreed to shelter his friend. When Kyle arrived, Mark immediately realized that the matter was serious. The guest looked gloomier than a cloud. "What's wrong, buddy?" Mark asked, closing the door behind him. "Are you sick? You look like crap." Kyle sat down tiredly on the couch in his friend's living room and rubbed his face with his hands. "Just problems at home. Can I stay at your place for a couple of nights? I don't want to go back now." Mark sat down next to him, looking at his comrade with concern. "Sure, stay as long as you need. But you know I won't leave until you tell me what's going on." Kyle was silent for a long time, collecting his thoughts. It was painful to admit out loud that his wife might be cheating, but he couldn't stay silent any longer. He said quietly, distinctly, "I think Bree is cheating on me." Mark exhaled. "Damn, are you sure?" 99%, Kyle chuckled darkly. "I saw her correspondence by accident, and all the signs are there. It's impossible not to understand." The friend clenched his fists. "Bitch. Sorry, but I can't say it any other way. You know, I admit I never really liked her. She was just too selfish. Listen, do you want me to talk to her, or—" "No," Kyle cut him off sharply. "No need for anything. I'll figure it out myself. I need to be absolutely sure." He told Mark his plan, to fake leaving and then sneak back home on Saturday night to check if her client was there. Mark listened sympathetically and nodded. "Be careful," he warned. "If you catch them, don't do anything stupid in the heat of the moment. Better leave right away." Kyle smiled bitterly. "Don't worry, I'm not going to fight. I just want to see with my own eyes, and that's all." Mark put his arm around his friend's shoulders. "I understand that you are in pain now, but you are stronger than you think. Don't worry, you are not alone. I am here. We will help you get out." Kyle nodded gratefully, feeling his heart warm a little from his friend's support. The remaining 24 hours dragged on painfully. On Saturday afternoon, Kyle received a couple of casual texts from Bree, asking how his flight had been and saying she was fine. No confessions or alarms. She believed he was far away. Kyle responded briefly that he was fine and stopped communicating. As the evening wore on, he was restless. Mark suggested they go out for dinner or something to do, but Kyle declined. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, his patience snapped, and he drove to his house. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. He parked the car a block away from the house so as not to give away his presence. Dusk was already gathering. Kyle quietly approached his plot and hid in the shadow of a tree opposite the house. Lights were on in the windows. Silhouettes were visible in the living room. A bitter lump rose in his throat as he made out two figures. One was Bree's. He recognized her gait and hair, and the other, taller, was definitely a man. They stood close. At some point, the figures moved closer to each other and merged in an embrace. Kyle closed his eyes, feeling an unbearable pain shoot through his chest. Although he had expected it, seeing it with his own eyes was far more terrifying. It took him a few seconds to pull himself together. He took out his phone, turned on the camera, and approaching the window on quiet steps, took a few pictures through a crack in the curtain. The pictures showed Bree huddled against a dark-haired man, kissing against a wall. It was enough, but Kyle couldn't stop. He was magnetically drawn to see it through to the end, even though every cell in his body was screaming in pain. He walked around the house to the back door that led straight into the bedroom. They rarely used that door, but Kyle had a key. He turned the lock as quietly as he could and crept inside. He could hear Bree's muffled voices and laughter coming from the living room. Kyle paused in the shadows of the hallway, slowly realizing what they were saying. "Are you sure he won't come back?" said a husky male voice. "He's in another city," Bree laughed. "Do you think I'd take that risk if Kyle was home?" His jaw clenched. There was the sound of a kiss, then the shuffling of feet toward the bedroom. Kyle crept down the darkened hallway, holding his breath. His heart was pounding loudly. The soft light of a floor lamp was pouring in from the slightly open bedroom door. As he got closer, he heard voices becoming clearer. "You're so beautiful. I go crazy when you're around," said an unfamiliar male voice. "Jake," Bree whispered back. Kyle held his breath and peered through the crack between the door and the frame. The sight that greeted him was forever etched in his memory. On the marital bed where she and Bree had spent so many nights together, she now lay half naked, with a man, naked to the waist, leaning over her. Kyle was overcome with such a flurry of emotions that for a moment his head was spinning. Anger, pain, disgust, all mixed together. He gripped the phone with trembling fingers and took a photo, though his hands were shaking so much that the image was blurry. But the evidence no longer mattered. He had seen it with his own eyes. He wanted to rush in there, rip Jake off the bed, and hit him, scream in Bree's face. "How could you?" But Kyle was frozen. His legs wouldn't obey him. He realized that if he showed himself now, he would lose control of himself. So he stepped back, trying not to make a sound. That was enough. There was nothing more to catch in this house that was no longer a home for him. Kyle silently slipped out the same back door he'd come in through. The night outside greeted him with a chill, but he didn't feel it. He walked to his car automatically and got behind the wheel. It wasn't until his shaking fingers missed the start button a few times that he realized his whole body was shaking. Adrenaline and shock were pouring out. He dropped his head onto the steering wheel and finally gave in to tears. That night, Kyle sat for a long time in thought. He sat there for an unknown amount of time. The searing pain gave way to icy numbness. Kyle turned on the ignition and drove away. He wanted to get as far away as possible from this area, from this house where his hopes had collapsed. A little later, he was already standing on the threshold of Mark's house. His friend opened the door right away. Apparently, Kyle had called him on the way, but he himself barely remembered it. Mark just glanced at his face and understood everything without words. He hugged his friend tightly. "I caught them," Kyle said hoarsely after a moment of silence. His voice was broken. "Right here, in our bedroom." Mark swore under his breath, keeping his hand on Kyle's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, buddy. But you did the right thing by not making a scene. It could have ended badly." Kyle nodded. The image was still in his mind's eye, and every time he saw it, he wanted to shrink away from the sharp pain. He covered his face with his hands. "What are you going to do now?" Mark asked softly. Kyle had time to think about this question during the trip. Through the shock and hurt, a rational grain was breaking through. He would not allow himself to be walked all over again. His silence was not a sign of weakness, but a chance to think things through coldly and strike back, depriving her of everything he had done for her. Kyle lowered his hands, opening his reddened eyes, and exhaled in a trembling voice. "I'm leaving. Forever. I'll take everything that's mine, and I'll never let her use me again." There was a firmness in these words, a new determination for him. Mark looked at him carefully and nodded. "If you need anything, help, housing, money, tell me right away. Don't be shy." "Thanks, friend. For now, all I need is time and a plan." That night, Kyle barely slept, not from tormenting doubts, but from feverish thoughts. He mentally made a list of everything he had to do to erase Bree from his life, like a diseased organ, once and for all. On Sunday morning, Kyle felt empty but determined. He sent Bree a text. "The flight was delayed. It looks like I won't be back until tomorrow evening." He wanted to gain time to carry out his plan without hindrance. His wife responded only briefly, "Bullet. No, I miss you," or "I'll see you soon." Another confirmation that she no longer cares about their marriage. With his backup plan complete, Kyle began planning his escape from his own life. The first thing he did was jot down a list of actions in his notebook. Collect personal belongings and valuables from the house. Take back the property you bought with your own money. Cancel joint accounts and cut off her access to finances. Change the receipt of salary to a personal account. Disable all subscriptions and services he paid for. Find a divorce lawyer. Mark volunteered to help move the stuff. They pulled up to the house around noon, having made sure Bree wasn't home. Her car wasn't in the driveway, probably back in town. Kyle unlocked the door with his key. The house was as orderly as usual, but now it felt foreign to him. Holding back the memories that came flooding back, he quickly walked through the rooms, collecting everything that belonged to him personally: clothes, equipment, documents. Every corner reminded him of their life together. There was a frame with their photo from a trip to California on the nightstand, and there were dresses he had given her hanging in the closet. But now was not the time to indulge in feelings. He carefully packed his things into suitcases and boxes. Then came the things he had bought for the house and for Bree. Kyle wasn't going to leave her the expensive toys she had been enjoying at his expense. He unplugged the large curved TV in the living room. He remembered getting it for himself for his birthday the year before, but he'd barely used it in the end, while his wife had been throwing movie nights for her girlfriends. It went into Mark's truck. Next, Kyle carefully packed the professional camera and ring light he'd given Bree last Christmas for her blogging hobbies. He grabbed the expensive blender and coffee maker in the kitchen, two all bought with his money. He didn't touch the jewelry and designer bags he'd given her for the holidays, though he'd thought about them. But they were gifts, and petty revenge was alien to him. As the men carried out the boxes, Kyle suddenly stopped at a hallway cabinet. There was a bank card in Bree's name, an additional card to his account that she used for personal expenses. He took the card, stuffed it in his pocket, and immediately called the bank to block it and change the access to the joint account. The operator asked formal questions, and Kyle answered automatically, watching Mark tape up another box. The access cancellation was successful. He transferred almost all of the funds from the joint account, where his salary was deposited, to his personal reserve account, leaving a token amount there. He was sure that Bree would soon discover that the money was missing. Having finished with his things, Kyle glanced around the empty rooms. His soul was heavy, but strangely calm, as if he was looking at someone else's life from the outside. In the bedroom, on his wife's bedside table, lay their wedding photo in an elegant frame. He picked it up. In the picture, they looked young and happy, lovingly at each other. Kyle took the photo out of the frame and, having crumpled it, threw it into the trash can. He left the empty frame on the nightstand. Let Bree fill this emptiness with whatever she wants in her new life without him. Having closed the door of the house and loaded the last things, he felt relief mixed with bitterness. "Well, is that it?" Mark asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Almost," Kyle nodded. "Just a couple of little things left." He opened his mobile banking app and withdrew Bree from the joint account entirely, making it his own. Then he went to the auto payments section. He turned off payments for her credit cards, car lease, gym membership, online movie subscription, everything that was written off from his account every month for her sake. The last step was to change the settings for his salary project. Now all the money would go only to his personal account. Having done this, he felt a strange satisfaction, as if he had finally regained control of his own life. "That's it now," he said to Mark, putting the phone away. They left, leaving the house locked. Kyle decided not to tell Bree a word for now. Let her come back and find what she deserved: emptiness and silence instead of the once cozy family hearth. On the way to the city where Kyle was going to rent an apartment, he called one of his friends, a divorce lawyer, and arranged a meeting. Everything needed to be formalized. The divorce process was ahead. But now he was not afraid of bureaucratic complications. The main thing was that he had escaped the trap of deception. From here on, only forward. Bree returned home late Sunday afternoon in high spirits. She had spent the morning and afternoon at the spa with a friend, enjoying a massage and facial, a gift from Jake when he said goodbye that morning. He was rushing off to run errands, and she had decided to treat herself. Not a thought about her husband or what she was doing lingered in her mind for a moment. Everything seemed under control. Kyle was away. She had the day off. What was wrong with a little self-care? But as soon as she stepped inside the house, Bree was wary. The hallway was dark and strangely empty. She fumbled for the light switch. Light flooded the hallway, and Bree gasped. The cabinet where Kyle's jacket usually hung was empty. His favorite sneakers were gone from the shoe rack. She quickly walked into the living room and felt her heart pound. The TV was gone. In its place were empty brackets. Bree ran through the rooms in a panic. In her husband's office, his computer and documents were missing. In the bedroom, an entire section of the closet was empty, where Kyle's shirts and jeans had gone. She noticed that some of the household appliances were missing too. No coffee machine, no expensive blender. It was as if someone had purposefully taken the most valuable things from the house. "What the hell?" she whispered, feeling panic rising. Her gaze fell on the nightstand. There was an empty picture frame there. It had once held their wedding photo. Now the picture was gone, and only the bare frame reflected the lamplight. Nearby, in the trash, was a crumpled rectangle of paper. Bree pulled it out with shaking hands. It was their photo, torn and crumpled. She unclenched her fingers, and the scrap fell to the floor. The realization hit like ice water. Kyle had done it. Not the break-in, not the robbers her husband. He had found out, and he was gone. "No, no, no," she moaned, rushing to the nightstand in his office where financial papers usually lay. Bree pulled out the drawer and saw that the folder with the bank documents was missing. She frantically grabbed her phone and dialed Kyle's number. The number rang for a long time, but no one answered. She tried again, same result. The third time the call was disconnected. "Damn," she screamed out loud, throwing the phone on the couch. In the hours that followed, Bree rushed around the house, trying to understand the scale of what had happened. She found a piece of a refrigerator magnet lying on the kitchen floor apparently. When they were removing the TV, they knocked over the magnet with notes. There was also an old postcard that Kyle had once given her on the kitchen floor. There were traces of equipment being moved here and there. Everything pointed to the fact that her husband had coldly and methodically packed up and left. Around 10 o'clock, having calmed down a little from the initial shock, she made another attempt to get through. This time Kyle answered, but remained silent. Bree rushed to speak first. "Kyle, what happened? Where are you?" Her voice trembled. There was silence on the line for a while. Then his voice came through, muffled and cold. "It all happened, Bree. I know about you and your client." Her legs gave way, and she sat down on the living room floor. "Listen, she began, but she didn't know what to say. "It's not like you." "Don't you dare try to lie," Kyle cut her off, raising his voice. "I saw it with my own eyes, in our house, on our bed." Bree closed her eyes, feeling herself burning with shame and fear. "Kyle, I'm sorry. Please, let's talk." He laughed briefly and angrily. "Mistake, multiple and deliberate. No, Bree, that's enough. I'm gone, and I'm not going back." "You're leaving me with nothing. That's cruel, Kyle." Bree's voice took on a hysterical tone. "How am I? How am I going to live?" She swallowed hard, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. She had never heard him speak like that before, coldly, distantly. "But we're a family. You can't just disappear," she blurted out, more out of desperation. "I can, and I already have. Tomorrow my lawyer will contact you about the divorce," he snapped. "I left you everything that belongs to you. I took the rest." Bree tried to catch her breath. Panic swept through her. She hadn't planned for this outcome at all. She thought she was in control, that her husband would never know. And then, in an instant, she lost everything. "How? How about me?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It's not my problem anymore," Kyle replied coldly. "I tried to make you happy for a long time, but it wasn't enough for you. Goodbye, Bree." The beeps signaled the end of the conversation. She tried to call back, but his phone was already switched off. Bree burst into tears, her face in her hands. She wanted to believe that this was a bad dream, but the empty, quiet house around her proved otherwise. She was alone, without support, and tomorrow she would have to somehow go on living. The first few days after Kyle's departure were a living nightmare for Bree. She woke up in an empty, cold house where every detail reminded her of her loss. But what weighed most heavily on her was not the longing for her husband, but a growing sense of panic. Without Kyle's financial support, her world was rapidly crumbling. On Monday, barely able to muster her strength, Bree tried to live as if nothing had happened. She went to work at a real estate agency, hoping to distract herself. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited her there. Dr. Jake Blake, their wealthy client, withdrew his application to buy a house. Coworkers whispered that he suddenly decided to contact another agent. Bree understood perfectly well what was going on. He did not answer her messages. Once she tried to call him without success. Apparently, the affair with her was just a light affair for him. He helped her have a good time, gave her a couple of gifts, but he was not going to take part in her problems. Having lost a major client, Bree heard the cold tone of her boss, who hinted that he had hoped for a deal, but she had let the firm down. That afternoon, when she returned home for lunch, she decided to order food from a restaurant to somehow please herself. But the delivery app declined the payment. Bree entered her card details several times, to no avail. She called the bank, and they said the card had been blocked by the account holder. It dawned on her. Kyle had cut off her access to her money. When she dialed his number again, she heard a dry auto notification. The subscriber was unavailable. That night, Bree couldn't sleep for a long time. She was counting her meager savings. It turned out that she only had a few $100s in her personal account. Before, she hadn't cared about it, because her husband paid for all the big expenses. Now she urgently needed to find money to cover a bunch of mandatory payments: rent, car bills, loans. Yes, over the past few years, she had racked up debt on credit cards, buying designer clothes and gadgets for her blog, confident that Kyle would help pay it all off. Now the banks were starting to call her, demanding that she make minimum payments. She had already missed one payment by midweek, and the interest was mounting. In desperation, Bree even tried writing to Jake, the very lover for whom she had destroyed her marriage. She sent him long messages, begging for a loan or temporary help, but he read them and did not respond. She tried calling him, but his secretary answered and coldly informed him that Dr. Blake was very busy and would call back when he had a chance. Of course, he did not call back. It finally dawned on Bree that she could not expect anything from the lover who had cost her her family. In an attempt to get out of trouble, Bree put a couple of expensive handbags and dresses her husband had given her up for sale on an online flea market, hoping to raise some money. It was humiliating, but she had no choice. She managed to sell a few things, but the money was only enough to cover the debt and buy food. She tried to maintain the appearance of well-being on social media. She made posts from old stock photos, captioning them optimistically, "Time for renewal and change," or "New horizons ahead." But attentive subscribers noticed the changes. The new photos did not have the usual chic, no restaurants, expensive purchases, trips. Questions began to appear in the comments. "Bree, is everything okay? Where did your husband go?" She ignored these questions, but inside everything was shrinking with shame and anger. When one of her close friends, also a blogger, asked in private messages if it was true that Kyle had left and taken all of her property, rumors were spreading quickly. Bree lost her temper and was rude to her. As a result, her friend unfriended her. Bree's reputation began to plummet. The world of glamorous bloggers is cruel, and as soon as information about her collapse leaked out, many turned away. Some gloated behind her back, some sympathized openly, half-heartedly and out of curiosity, but no one offered any real help. In despair, Bree thought about how quickly everything had gone wrong. A month ago, she had been living like a queen, the best spas, restaurants, gifts, online admirers. Now she sat at night, clutching her head over a pile of bills. On the table in front of her were envelopes demanding payment on her credit card and utility bills. Next to her, the screen of her silent phone blinked with a dozen missed calls from banks and debt collectors. Her hours at work were cut without her own car. Her car was leased to Kyle, and he stopped making payments, so it was soon repossessed. She was often late for showings, having to take public transportation. Clients, one after another, preferred to go to other agents. Her boss looked at her with increasing disapproval. She knew she was about to be fired. One particularly difficult evening, when a new debt notice filled her inbox, Bree, swallowing tears, typed a message to Kyle. "You ruined my life. Why did you do this? I was left with nothing. Let's talk." But the message remained unread. Then a plan matured in her head. If no one wanted to help voluntarily, she would turn to the public herself. It was necessary to present the story in such a way as to evoke sympathy. Bree spent a long time drafting a post, telling how she was left alone after the domestic tyranny of her husband, who also committed economic violence. He allegedly deprived her of her livelihood. She hoped that her subscribers would feel sorry for the poor girl and help her financially. The idea of crowdfunding seemed like a salvation, to raise money for the first time for rent, to pay off debts. "After all, I deserve support too," Bree convinced herself, typing the text of the appeal with trembling fingers. A few days after he left, Kyle met with his divorce lawyer. They sat in a conference room at the law firm, and Kyle felt a little tense, revealing for the first time to a stranger the sordid details of his marriage's breakdown. But the lawyer, a gray-haired, quiet man in his 60s named Robert, listened attentively, nodding and taking notes. "First of all, you did the right thing by collecting evidence," Robert said, looking at the photos and screenshots of the correspondence that Kyle had brought on a flash drive. In a Washington state court, the fact of infidelity itself does not play a decisive role in the division of property, but in the context of your case, It may affect the denial of alimony to the spouse. Kyle nodded. He didn't understand the legalese very well, but he understood the main point. Bree would not be able to claim his future earnings. We don't have any children together, and almost all of our property was purchased with my money, he added. Her car is registered in my name. We rented a house. There were no joint savings either. I kept everything in a personal account. Robert noted approvingly. Excellent. This simplifies matters. We will present your evidence and financial documents to the court. I think we will be able to formalize the divorce fairly quickly and without significant losses for you. Kyle couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He'd been afraid that the process would drag on for years or that Bree would demand half of the property, but his lawyer had assured him that there was nothing to fear. The only advice, Robert said as he shook hands with his client. Try not to communicate with your wife directly, leave it to the lawyers. Any emotions can only harm the case. Kyle agreed. He felt much more confident as he left the office. The divorce was officially underway, and it would soon be over. Even then, as he walked out onto the sunny street from the lawyer, he felt a heavy weight lift from his soul. The end of this chapter was near. Bree mustered up her courage and published a post on her page that no one expected from her. In the photos, she appeared without makeup, with a sad expression on her face. Against the backdrop of a modestly furnished kitchen, she took a photo of the corner so that the lack of equipment would not be visible. In a long text under the photo, she told a dramatic story, how her husband left her with nothing, how she suffered from financial control and abuse in the marriage, how now she needs help to start a new life with a clean slate. Bree tried not to overdo it, but still embellished. She hinted that the reason for her husband's departure was his desire to completely control her, that she allegedly tried to resist and was punished for this by depriving herself of funds. Of course, she did not mention a word about her betrayal. At the end of the post, there was a link to a crowdfunding page where anyone could donate money to support Bree in a difficult situation. As she clicked publish, she felt her heart jump out of her chest. It was a desperate move, but she saw no other way out. Either try to use her fame and people's pity now, or soon slide into bankruptcy and shame. At first, it seemed like the plan might work. The post quickly gained likes from numerous subscribers. The comments poured in with words of support. Hold on, we're with you. What a horror, don't give up. I translated a little for you, I hope it helps. A few donations did come in during the first few hours, though the amounts were modest tens, $100 at most. Bree sat refreshing the fundraising page and smiled through her tears for the first time in a long time. People believed her. Just a little more, and she would get through it. But the joy was short-lived. By evening, alarming comments appeared under the post. One of the accounts, hidden behind a pseudonym, wrote, "Didn't you cheat on your husband with another man while he worked hard to satisfy your desires?" Bree felt her fingers grow cold. She quickly deleted the comment and blocked the user, hoping no one had seen it. However, several more similar ones appeared immediately after. Tell me the full story of why my husband left. Someone sneered. Another user openly stated, if I knew the truth, no one would give you a penny. It seemed that the information had leaked. Perhaps someone she knew who knew the real reason for the breakup had decided to reveal their cards. The comments with accusations poured in one after another. Bree's phone was blowing up with notifications. She frantically tried to clear them, deleting dozens of messages, but they multiplied faster than she could press the buttons. Some subscribers, who had recently felt sorry for her, began asking questions. Bree, is it true? You cheated on your husband? The accumulated anti-fans and envious people also took advantage of the moment. Evil ridicule and accusations of lying rained down. Someone wrote, have you tried working? It would be better if you learned a profession instead of begging. Another commentator quipped, they took away the spas and boutiques, immediately went online to complain. It's my own fault. Bree tried to respond, to justify herself, but this only provoked the public. The wave of hate grew like an avalanche. In a day, the post received thousands of comments, but among them, hardly a dozen remained positive. Fundraising practically stopped. After the initial sympathetic contributions, no new donations were received. Moreover, several people publicly stated that they were withdrawing their donations after learning about the fraud. 2 days after the campaign began, Bree couldn't take it anymore, deleted the post, and disabled the ability to comment on new posts. Her plan failed. The crowdfunding raised a paltry $300, which was not enough to cover even a third of her monthly rent, and the price of this attempt was a completely tarnished reputation. She lost hundreds of subscribers, partner brands terminated contracts, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. In the eyes of the internet audience, she turned from a glamorous diva into a liar and a fraud. When the doorbell rang one evening, Bree, disheveled and with red eyes from tears, went to answer it with resignation. A courier was standing on the threshold with an envelope. It turned out to be official papers about the beginning of the divorce process. Kyle had filed for divorce. For Bree, this was the final blow. Now there was no hope that he would come to his senses and come back. It was all over. She closed the door and slid down to the hallway floor. The darkness was gathering around her. Bree realized with a painful clarity she had created all the consequences for herself. From a beautiful fairy tale about the carefree life of a successful engineer's wife, she had slid into a pathetic story about a fallen influencer who had deceived everyone. And ahead lay uncertainty and loneliness. 2 months had passed since Kyle left Bree. At first, it was difficult. His usual life had been shattered into pieces, and he had to build a new reality on its ruins. He rented a small one-room apartment closer to the office, a modest but cozy home where everything belonged to him and did not remind him of the past. In the evenings, returning from work, Kyle learned to enjoy the silence. He read books that he had long put aside, resumed jogging in the city park in the morning, and began to cook simple but tasty food for himself. No one reproached him for scattered socks or returning late. He was his own boss. And this feeling gradually brought peace. The pain of Bree's betrayal didn't go away instantly. For the first few weeks, Kyle would often wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares, remembering that horrific scene in the bedroom. But over time, those wounds healed. He went to a therapist, openly talked about his feelings, and vented his resentment and anger. He remembered how, during the very first session, he couldn't hold back his tears after talking about his pain. The therapist then calmly said, "Your feelings are understandable, but your partner's betrayal is a reflection of her problems, not yours. You did everything you could. It's not your fault." Those words sank deep into Kyle's soul. Gradually, during the sessions, he learned to let go of the feeling of resentment and switch to the future. Work became his salvation and growth area. Freed from the constant stress at home, Kyle dove into projects with renewed energy. Colleagues noticed the changes. Before, he often looked tired and irritable, but now he has become calmer, smarter, and even more productive. He voluntarily took on difficult tasks, stayed voluntarily not because he was afraid to go home, but because he was truly passionate. As a result, a large cloud platform optimization project that he led was successfully completed a month ahead of schedule. This did not go unnoticed by management. One day after the meeting, the department head, David, asked Kyle to stay late. "Kyle," David began with a smile when they were alone in the conference room, "I wanted to talk to you about your work. You've been doing really well lately. The Apex Cloud project is coming off a great finish. The client is happy, and so is the management." "Thank you." Kyle was a little embarrassed by the praise. "I tried. We all see how hard you're trying. You're making obvious progress and have leadership qualities," the boss continued, crossing his arms. "I'd like to offer you a new position, senior engineer and technical lead for the next big project. That means a promotion and a pay raise, of course." Kyle raised his eyebrows in surprise. He hadn't expected such a quick confession. "Wow, David, thank you for your trust. I agree, of course." "Great," David shook his hand. "We'll take care of all the formalities in HR. And know this, you deserve it. Keep it up." Kyle walked out of the conference room with a smile on his face. His life had just seemed to have fallen apart, and now he felt like new opportunities had emerged from the rubble. The promotion meant not only a higher salary, though that was welcome, given his impending divorce, but also a sense of self-worth. He felt good about being valued as a professional and that his efforts were paying off. That evening, he met Mark in a small pub to celebrate the good news. Over a beer, Kyle shared the details. "Look at that, huh? New tech lead." Mark clapped his friend on the shoulder. "I'm proud of you, honestly." "Thank you," Kyle smiled. "I can't believe it myself yet. So much has changed." They clinked their glasses. Mark looked at him, squinting slightly. "You know, since the day you left, you've changed too. At first you were broken, that's understandable. But now I look you've become alive, real. It's like a weight has been lifted from my soul." Kyle nodded, swirling his glass thoughtfully. "Honestly, that's true. Yes, it was hard. But now, I feel free and even happy sometimes. Of course, sometimes I feel hurt, angry, but I'm learning to let go." Mark raised his finger approvingly. "That's right. Just a little more, and you'll be as fit as a fiddle. By the way, about happiness. Have you ever thought about, well, dating again?" Kyle frowned slightly. "I don't know, Mark. I don't really want to yet. I'd like to sort out the divorce, and I'm probably not ready to trust again." "I understand. But keep in mind, not everyone is like." Mark stopped short, not wanting to pronounce Bree's name. "Anyway, maybe somewhere nearby there is that same normal girl who will appreciate you at your true worth." Kyle chuckled. "Let's hope. But I'm not looking specifically for now." They changed the subject, moving on to discussing their plans for the weekend. Kyle mentioned that he was thinking about going out of town. He had long wanted to visit the lake, but never had the time. Now no one would accuse him of wasting his time or dragging himself somewhere in the wrong direction. In the middle of the evening, Mark, scrolling through the feed on his phone, suddenly became gloomy. "Hey, look!" He turned the screen towards Kyle. The screen showed Bree's Instagram app and her page. Kyle hadn't checked it since leaving, but now he saw her new post, a tear-stained face, long text. He glanced at it and clenched his jaw. It seemed like Bree was playing the victim. "That's bullshit," he cursed quietly. "That's what I thought," Mark nodded. "She's talking about financial abuse. Listen, maybe you should say something so that the truth is known." Kyle shook his head, handing the phone back to his friend. "I don't want to get involved. Let him say what he wants. I've done my job. My circle already knows the truth, and the rest is not important." That was the end of the subject. Deep down, Kyle was upset that Bree was bad-mouthing him, but he considered it beneath him to get involved in public squabbles. And his lawyer had warned him to stay away from any provocations until the divorce was finalized. As it turned out, there was no need to intervene. A week later, Mark showed him with a smile a forum where the failure of Bree's crowdfunding was being hotly discussed. Most now condemned her for lying and duplicity. Details of the betrayal surfaced. Someone posted screenshots of her old photos with her husband and wrote sarcastically about how she thanked him for the luxurious life. Even a couple of local publics picked up the story, exposing her as a fraudster. Public opinion swung sharply against her. Kyle only smiled sadly, but in his soul he felt relief. Justice had triumphed of its own accord. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings entered their final stages. Thanks to the evidence of infidelity, Kyle's lawyer managed to defend his interests. The property purchased with his money remained his, and the couple had almost no joint assets due to separate financial management. Bree received almost nothing except personal items. She was not entitled to alimony or maintenance. They did not have children, and the infidelity was taken into account during the analysis. In the end, the divorce was approved 3 months after the filing. Bree did not receive a cent in compensation. The court left the joint account with Kyle, recognizing that she did not contribute to its replenishment and denied her any maintenance. Kyle agreed to only temporarily give her a few months to move out of the rented house and transferred the lease to her name, getting rid of the last threads that connected them. When he received the divorce decree in the mail, he felt a strange sense of calm. The chapter with Bree was officially closed. There was one thing Kyle wasn't ready for yet: to let someone new into his life. But fate decreed otherwise. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Mark convinced Kyle to get out and meet people. One of their mutual friends was having a housewarming party at a small bar on Lake Washington, and a fun crowd was coming. Kyle initially resisted, not wanting to be around couples and loud conversations again, but his friend insisted. It was time to come out of his shell. In the end, Kyle agreed, deciding that an evening in a new company wouldn't hurt. The bar they went to was cozy, with live music and a view of the water. The sun was just setting, painting the lake in golden pink tones. Mark immediately found the hero of the occasion, their friend named Alex, and soon Kyle was meeting a bunch of new people. He was a little tense, since he was out of the habit of casual parties, but he tried to be friendly. "And this is Molly, my colleague," Alex introduced the pretty brunette in jeans and a light blouse standing next to him. "We're running a project together. She just recently moved to Seattle." In front of him was a girl about his age, with pleasant features and a genuine smile. There was a glint of laughter in her gray-green eyes. She looked friendly and confident. Molly extended her hand to Kyle. "It's very nice to meet you. Alex told me a lot about you." "Likewise," Kyle smiled back and lightly shook her hand. "I mean, it's nice." He was embarrassed by his own slip of the tongue, but Molly only smiled wider, changing the subject. "Alex said you also work in it?" "Yes, cloud technologies." Kyle nodded. "And what do you do?" "I'm a product manager. We're developing a fintech app," she explained. "Your topic is probably complicated. I've always thought that everything related to clouds is some kind of magic." Kyle laughed. "Mostly it's just servers and code, nothing mystical. But sometimes it really does feel like magic when everything works without a hitch." They started talking. Kyle felt that he could be himself comfortably around Molly. She listened to him attentively, asked questions, and made relevant jokes. It turned out that they had common interests. Both loved hiking and had recently read the same popular science book. Time flew by as they talked. Kyle laughed at her jokes and caught every word. He caught himself thinking that he hadn't felt so at ease around a woman in a long time. Not once that evening did he think about the pain of the past. He was completely carried away by communicating with this smart and kind girl. Somewhere behind him, Mark gave an approving thumbs up as he saw his friend talking animatedly to Molly. Kyle looked a little embarrassed, but simply waved his hand, brushing off the teasing. As the group began to disperse, Kyle felt a slight sadness. Was this really the end of his acquaintance with Molly? Gathering his courage, he asked, "Listen, can I write down your number? It would be great to talk again sometime." Molly readily dictated the number, taking his contact information in return. "I'd be glad if you called," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "I really enjoyed the evening, too." They exchanged warm smiles. On the way home, Mark couldn't resist teasing. "Well, look, our gloomy techie spent the whole evening chatting with a girl, and he got her number. I'm proud, I'm proud." Kyle shook his head with a smile. "Stop it. She's just nice, interesting, and easy to talk to." "It's obvious," my friend chuckled. "Did you even look at your face when you talked to her? You looked younger before our eyes." "Oh, come on," Kyle waved it off, but it was nice to hear. There was a glimmer of hope inside that meeting Molly wasn't a coincidence. His heart pounded as he thought about the upcoming call. However, he wasn't in a hurry to jump to conclusions or rush things. For the first time in a long time, Kyle felt a thrill akin to youthful affection, and it was a pleasant feeling. A few days later, Kyle decided to call Molly. His heart beat faster when she answered almost immediately. They chatted for a while, and Kyle, having gathered his courage, suggested that they meet up over the weekend. Molly readily agreed. They agreed to spend Saturday together, walking along a picturesque path along the bay and stopping at a small seaside restaurant. On Saturday morning, the sun was shining warmly. The weather was surprisingly warm for autumn. Kyle came to pick up Molly in his car. Seeing her on the porch of her house in a light jacket and jeans, with a joyful smile on her face, He felt how everything inside him turned over with pleasant excitement. Molly got into the car, and the interior immediately seemed to become brighter. "You've chosen a great day," she remarked cheerfully. "I've been looking forward to this walk for a week now." "Me too," Kyle admitted, pulling out onto the road. "It's not far, about 30 minutes. The driver flew by as they chatted. Molly told him how she was settling into life in Seattle, sharing funny observations about the weather and local coffee shops. Kyle found himself smiling all the time. He felt comfortable around her. They left the car in the parking lot at the trailhead and set off on foot along the coast. The trail wound through a pine forest, occasionally coming to a cliff above the water. On either side of the path lay a dense forest. Century-old pines stretched into the sky, curious squirrels ran between them. The waves of Puget Sound splashed below, and silhouettes of islands were visible in the distance. A fresh, salty wind ruffled their hair. Molly stopped a couple of times in delight to take photos of the landscape on her phone. "How beautiful," she said quietly as they came to a particularly picturesque ledge of rock. "Thank you for suggesting this place." "I'm glad you like it," Kyle smiled. "This is my first time here, to be honest. I've been wanting to get out for a long time." They sat down on a fallen tree to rest. The sun was warm, the air smelled of pine needles and the sea. They were silent for a few seconds, enjoying the moment. "You said you weren't from Seattle, right?" Molly asked, taking a sip from her bottle of water. "Yeah, I'm from a small town in Montana," Kyle said. "I went to school here at OE and stayed after college." "I see. But I lived my whole life on the East Coast, in Boston. I decided to change the scenery, so I moved 3,000 miles away," she smiled. "Bold decision," Kyle noted. "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes I miss my family, my friends. But overall, no. I like it here. I feel like I'm starting a new stage." Molly's words resonated inside him. A new stage, how familiar. He, too, was starting over. Kyle considered whether to reveal more about himself. Molly already knew from mutual friends that he had recently been divorced, but they hadn't discussed the details. "It wasn't just the job that moved me," Molly added suddenly, looking out over the water. "I needed a reset too, a break with the past." Kyle looked at her with a knowing expression. "Was the breakup difficult?" She nodded. "That's partly why I moved so far away. We dated for several years and thought about marriage, but it turned out that he cheated on me, with my friend, and for quite a long time." Kyle felt a chill run down his spine, the story all too familiar. He gently touched her hand with his palm. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." Molly smiled sadly. "It's all in the past." Then it seemed like the world had collapsed. But I decided not to torment myself with questions of why. I just left and started all over again. And now, she turned to him, softening her smile. "I'm glad that life is changing for the better." Kyle realized he could trust her. She knew this pain firsthand. His heart sank, and he said quietly, "I was cheated on too. My wife, my ex-wife, I caught them in our house." Molly nodded seriously, her eyes sparkling with sympathy. "I guess something like that. Sorry, it's terrible." "Yes," he exhaled, looking away to the horizon. "But you know, now I can talk about it calmly. I went through hell, but I got out. And probably I only became stronger." He looked at her again and tried to smile. Molly squeezed his hand gently. "You're great. Not everyone can survive such betrayal and maintain faith in themselves and in people." For a few moments, they just sat there, holding hands. Kyle could feel the warmth of her palm and the warmth that came from her. How amazing to meet someone with such a similar background who understood you without you having to say anything. The walk continued in an even more intimate tone. They shared stories about how they dealt with pain and how they found the strength to move on. Molly said that she had almost no friends in Seattle and that she threw herself into her work and also got a dog from a shelter, which really helps her not to feel lonely. Kyle shared in response how much Mark had done for him and how work and therapy had helped him recover. Molly listened attentively, without interrupting, and when he talked about the hardest moments, she lightly touched his shoulder or arm, letting him know that she was there. It was close to midday when they came to the very restaurant by the water that they had heard reviews about. They settled down at a table on the open terrace, from where there was a view of the bay. A light breeze rustled the tablecloth. They ordered fresh seafood and homemade wine. Over dinner, the conversation became lighter. They laughed as they discussed their favorite movies. It turned out that an old sci-fi movie was their favorite, which surprised and amused them. For the first time in a long time, Kyle felt understood and accepted for who he was. No bravado, no trying to impress, he didn't have to pretend. Molly was genuine and open, and his soul was drawn to her. After lunch, they walked a little further along the beach. When it was time to say goodbye, Kyle was reluctant to let her go. They stopped at her house. Molly was about to get out of the car when she suddenly returned and, rummaging in her purse, pulled out a small container. "Here, these are for you," she said a little shyly. "I baked cookies the day before yesterday. I thought I'd bring them to work, but I'd rather have them for you." Kyle took the container in surprise, inside of which lay several oatmeal cookies. "Thank you, that's very kind of you," he said, touched by the attention. Molly hesitated for a second, then added quietly, "And thank you for today. I haven't felt this good in a long time." Kyle felt a familiar, pleasant flutter in his chest. He looked into her eyes, green and radiant in the rays of the setting sun. He wanted to kiss her very much. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly leaned in. Molly responded, brushing her lips softly against his. The kiss was light, but filled with warmth. When they pulled away, they both smiled sheepishly. "See you soon," Molly whispered, gathering her things and getting out of the car. Kyle watched her leave the door. His heart was soaring. He realized he wanted to see Molly again, and soon. That day, when he got home, for the first time in a long time, he felt not just relief, but real joy. It was as if the sun had finally come out from behind the clouds and illuminated his new life. Kyle and Molly's relationship developed naturally and warmly. They saw each other several times a week, sometimes going out for dinner, sometimes watching a movie at his house, sometimes walking in the park. About a month had passed since their first walk, and during this time they had become truly close. However, Kyle still sometimes caught himself being cautious. Every time happiness seemed too obvious, fear stirred deep inside. What if this too turned out to be an illusion? One evening, they were sitting on the cozy couch in Kyle's apartment, cuddling under a soft blanket. A series was playing softly on the TV, but they were both more occupied with a quiet conversation. Molly told a funny story from work, and Kyle laughed. He loved her humor and the ease with which she approached life, despite what she had experienced in the past. Molly's phone vibrated on the coffee table, flashing a notification. She glanced at the screen, and her expression changed slightly. "Sorry, I have to answer," she said, and, rising, went out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind her. Kyle felt a sickening lurch inside. The situation suddenly seemed alarmingly familiar, a girl going off to talk on the phone. He tried to push away the stupid suspicions, but old wounds came back to haunt him. His heart began to beat faster. Through the glass, he saw Molly talking animatedly on the phone, her face serious. It didn't last long, a minute, maybe two, after which she returned. Kyle tried to hide his concern, but apparently not very successfully. Molly, sitting down next to him, looked at him carefully. "Everything is fine." He looked away. "Yes, I was just thinking." Molly touched his shoulder gently. "Hey." She waited for his eyes to meet hers. "That was my boss. Just checking in on the details of tomorrow's presentation." Kyle blinked. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to butt in. Did you think something was wrong?" she asked directly, but without condemnation, rather with sympathy. Kyle sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. It was probably stupid. It's just that when you come out to talk, I suddenly had memories. Bree was always hiding with her phone. I know you're not her. But subconsciously, I was scared." Molly moved closer and hugged him. her voice confident and warm. "You have every right to feel that way after everything you've been through. Thank you for telling me. But know this, I'm always honest with you. If something's wrong, I'll tell you straight out." Kyle nodded, pulling her closer. "I know. It's just that sometimes my brain plays tricks on me. I really trust you." He felt a weight lift from his soul. Not long ago, he would have kept silent and withdrawn, but now he could openly share his fear, and it did not push her away. On the contrary, Molly understood and supported him. "I'll never give you any reason to doubt," she added quietly, looking into his eyes. "I promise." Kyle's eyes stung. He didn't think he'd ever trust someone like that again. He ran his hand down her cheek. "I also promise to be honest, and I will try not to drag ghosts of the past into our relationship." Molly responded with a gentle kiss. The kiss gradually grew hotter, with a growing passion and intimacy. Kyle tangled his fingers in her soft hair, and Molly breathed softly against his lips. Their feelings had grown stronger over the past month, and the desire to be closer was growing stronger. They slowly moved into the bedroom, lit by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Kyle gently lowered Molly onto the bed, continuing to cover her lips and face with kisses. She responded by helping him pull off her sweater. For Kyle, it was more than just physical intimacy. Every look Molly gave him, every touch she gave him, confirmed that there was love and respect here. Their closeness was different from anything he had known before, not blind passion, but a deep union of two souls who had trusted each other with the most fragile thing, their hearts. There were only the two of them in this universe of warmth, love, and tenderness. When it was over, he held her close, feeling their hearts beat in unison. Molly settled against his chest, her arm around him. They lay in silence for a while, catching their breath. "I love you," Kyle whispered barely audibly, allowing himself these words for the first time after a long pause. Molly raised her head, looked at him seriously, and answered just as sincerely, "I love you too." Hearing this, Kyle felt a quiet happiness spreading inside. He kissed her forehead and hugged her tightly. At that moment, he realized that the past had finally let him go. The pain, the hurt, the betrayal, all of that was left behind. Now next to him was a person who cared about him, who respected and loved him truly. A couple more months passed. Kyle's life had settled into a calm, happy routine that he had never dreamed of before. Molly gradually moved in with him, first staying for weekends, then bringing a few boxes of her things, and soon she began living with him permanently. His modest apartment turned into a cozy nest for two. Bright potholders and jars of spices appeared in the kitchen, a hand-knitted blanket and photographs of him and Molly smiling against the backdrop of the mountains and the sea in the living room. The morning began with Kyle waking up from a light kiss on the cheek and a quiet exclamation. "Wake up, sleepyhead, coffee is ready." Molly got up earlier and spoiled him with breakfast. He responded in kind. In the evenings, he often met her after work with a hot dinner. They took care of each other with love and pleasure. No tension or sense of duty, everything went naturally. They just wanted to make each other happy. One Saturday, they threw a small party at their house. They invited Mark and his new girlfriend, a couple of colleagues, and Alex and company to drop by. It was the first time Kyle had formally introduced Molly to his inner circle as his girlfriend. He was a little nervous, but Molly fit right in. She joked around, helped set the table, and discussed the latest tech with Kyle's colleagues. Mark, seizing the moment, pulled Kyle aside and quietly said, "Your house has really changed. And you too. I'm happy for you, friend." Kyle looked back at Molly, who was laughing at a joke made by one of the guests, and smiled. "Thank you. I still can't believe how lucky I am." Mark patted him on the shoulder. "It's not luck, it's deserved happiness. After all the shit, you deserve normal treatment." Kyle just nodded, feeling the warmth spreading in his chest. He really felt truly happy and, most importantly, calm about his future. After the guests left, Kyle and Molly were left alone to sort out the light mess. She was collecting empty glasses, and he was taking out the trash bags. At one point, they stopped in the middle of the living room and looked at each other, surrounded by the cozy chaos of the party. Molly suddenly laughed. You know, I haven't had such a good time in a long time. You have wonderful friends. They're so excited about you, Kyle smiled. Mark spent an hour singing my praises about how smart you are and how you've changed me. Change it? Molly raised an eyebrow with a smile. In a good way, he assured her, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around her waist. He said I look happy and relaxed now, and it's true, thanks to you. Molly rubbed her nose against his cheek. Maybe it's because of both of us. We're just happy together. They stood there, swaying in their embrace, the only sound in the silence being the purring of the cat Molly had adopted from the streets a few weeks ago. The ginger cat was rubbing against Kyle's legs, demanding attention. Kyle laughed and leaned down to pet the furry bandit. Barney's already jealous, Molly joked, leaning down to pet the cat with him. Barney purred contentedly, and Kyle, looking at this sweet picture, suddenly thought that his home now associated with exactly such moments. The laughter of his beloved girl, a warm lump at his feet, the smell of baking in the kitchen. Molly loved baking and often spoiled him with her signature pies, and no tension or fear. Later, before bed, they lay in bed, discussing plans for the following weekend. Molly excitedly told them that they had been invited to her cousin's wedding in Boston in a month. She was worried whether Kyle would agree to fly with her to meet her large family. Of course I'll fly, he answered calmly, intertwining his fingers with hers. I'm glad you want to introduce me to your family. Molly smiled. Of course I would. They love to hear stories about what a great boyfriend I have. They all want to meet you. Kyle threw up his hand in mock exclamation. Oh my God, what a responsibility. I hope I live up to expectations. Molly snorted and kissed him on the lips. Just be yourself. That's more than enough. He pulled her closer, feeling grateful for every moment spent with her. He used to think that love was work and compromise, but with Molly everything was different. Easy, harmonious. Of course, they also discussed serious things, sometimes argued over trifles. For example, the recent story with buying a sofa. They spent half a day in the store, unable to agree on the color. She liked blue. He liked gray. In the end, laughing at their pickiness, they agreed on a neutral shade. But any disagreements were resolved calmly, with respect for each other. Not a single quarrel with shouting or insults. Kyle had no experience of such things in his previous marriage, and he appreciated it. That night, falling asleep in her arms, he thought that he had finally found what he had been missing for all these years, a sense of home and love. Unconditional, warm love, where he was valued and respected, and he was ready to do everything for Molly in return. For the first time, the future seemed bright and joyful to him. Autumn in New England greeted them with a bright carpet of crimson and gold leaves. Kyle and Molly flew to Boston for a few days to attend her sister's wedding. It was Kyle's first encounter with Molly's extended family, and he was a little nervous, though she did her best to reassure him. The wedding ceremony took place in a cozy old church on the outskirts of town. Molly was one of the bridesmaids, and as she walked down the aisle in a soft lavender dress, Kyle couldn't take his eyes off her. He thought about how beautiful she was and how lucky he was. A year ago, he couldn't even imagine that he would be at such an event and as the beloved of a charming girl. After the ceremony, at a reception at a country club, Kyle was showered with friendly attention by Molly's family. Her parents, aunts, cousins all wanted to meet the really nice guy Molly had talked about. He was a little shy at first, but the warmth melted away the awkwardness. Molly's father, a burly, gray-haired man, even took him out for a whiskey and asked him about his work and plans. Take care of my girl, he said seriously at last, patting Kyle on the shoulder. I promise, sir, Kyle replied with sincerity, and he really meant it. He would do anything to make Molly happy. At the reception, they danced, laughed with her many cousins, and ate cake. Molly beamed with joy for her sister, and Kyle found himself thinking that he, too, was happy just to be part of this close-knit family, if only for a few days. When the slow dance began, he pulled Molly to him. She settled comfortably on his chest, and they swayed to the music. People danced around the couple, the lights flickering. "What are you thinking about?" Molly asked quietly, looking into his eyes. Kyle smiled. "I think I've never been so calm and happy at the same time. Your family is wonderful, and you are wonderful to me." Molly narrowed her eyes with a gentle smile. "Someone seems to be getting emotional," she teased. "A little," he admitted. "I just remembered how a year ago at this time." He didn't finish, but Molly understood. "You were unhappy a year ago," she said softly, "but look how things have changed." Kyle looked around the room, people laughing, himself hugging the woman he loved, a Christmas invitation from her parents in his jacket pocket. He nodded. "Yes, it has changed for the better. Thank you." "There's nothing to thank me for, silly." Molly kissed him on the nose. "We got through this together, and there's still a lot of good things ahead of us." He suddenly felt a lump in his throat from the overwhelming emotion. Kyle stopped and pulled a small velvet box from his inside jacket pocket. Molly froze in surprise when he opened it, revealing an elegant ring with a neat, shiny stone. "This is—" Molly covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening. Kyle took her hand, looked at her seriously and a little embarrassed. "I didn't plan to do this today and so suddenly. But now is the right moment, I feel. Molly, you brought the light into my life that I lacked so much. You have become more than just my lover, my support, my best friend. I want to spend all my days with you. Will you marry me?" Molly gasped, tears of happiness glistening on her eyelashes. Kyle: "Of course, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her shaking finger, and they hugged tightly to a burst of applause as those around them, noticing what was happening, cheered and laughed. The bride's sister, still in her wedding dress, playfully shook her finger at Molly, as if to say she was stealing the spotlight, and everyone buzzed. Molly laughed through her tears, and Kyle felt his heart about to jump out of his chest, with joy, with love, with the knowledge that he was starting a new chapter. No longer alone, but with the woman he loved, who would never betray him. Late that night, when the party was over, and they returned home to Molly's parents, Kyle lay in bed holding her hand. The newlyweds exchanged tired but happy smiles. "You know, it was unexpected," Molly whispered, "but I never doubted the answer for a second." Kyle kissed her hair. "I'm surprised by my own spontaneity. I just suddenly realized that there's no point in dragging it out. I'm confident in us." Molly turned to him, looking seriously into his eyes. "I'm sure of it too. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." He gently ran his finger over the ring on her hand. "We both went through hard times, but apparently fate knew what it was doing. All those mistakes in the past led us towards each other." Molly nodded, settling herself more comfortably next to him. "The main thing is that we made the right conclusions and didn't become embittered. Now everything will definitely be fine." In the silence of the autumn night, Kyle closed his eyes with a feeling of absolute harmony. His future wife was breathing in her sleep next to him. Ahead of them were days together, calm and stormy, joyful, and perhaps not so, but he knew that they would cope with any trials. Because at the heart of their union were trust, respect, and love, that solid foundation that he so lacked in his previous life. Back in Seattle, Kyle and Molly were busy with pleasant activities. The news of the engagement had spread among all their friends and acquaintances. Mark, hearing the joyful "we're engaged" over the phone, initially thought it was a joke, but quickly switched to the role of best friend and potential best man. He announced that he would take charge of organizing the bachelor party, which greatly amused Kyle. Kyle also called his parents in Montana. His mother cried tears of joy when she learned that her son had found love again and was getting married. His father, not a talkative man, gave a resounding "Congratulations, son," and that meant a lot to Kyle. His parents promised to come to the wedding and finally meet Molly in person. The bride and groom themselves decided not to drag it out. Both had already been through enough to know what they wanted. They chose a date in 4 months, at the beginning of summer, when the weather in Seattle is sunny. They decided to hold the ceremony outdoors on the shore of a lake, with a small circle of the closest relatives. In between work, Kyle and Molly made guest lists, went to try on dresses, and chose the menu. Molly joked that organizing a wedding was a good test for a couple. They learned to understand each other even better, to give in to small things, and to seek compromises. Kyle was surprised every day by how easily any issues were resolved with her. Where before, quarrels could flare up over trivialities, with Molly everything was peaceful. The main thing was to listen to the wishes of your loved one. Over these months, life finally got better. The divorce from Bree remained a distant memory, lost among the new happy days. Kyle sometimes saw mentions of his ex-wife on social networks. There were rumors that she had moved to another city and was trying to start a career as a realtor there anew, albeit without much success. But this news did not cause anything in him except slight indifference. Sometimes he thought, it's a pity that he was once wrong about her, but then it was necessary. Someone else's life, someone else's problems, now it did not concern him. The night before their wedding, Kyle and Molly had a quiet evening together. They sat on the balcony of their apartment with glasses of champagne, enjoying the warm summer evening. The lights of the city twinkled below, and the scent of blooming gardens wafted in on a gentle breeze. Molly rested her head on his shoulder. "I can't believe tomorrow is our ex-day," she whispered, smiling. Kyle kissed the top of her head. "Me too. Honestly, are you worried?" She giggled softly. "There is a little bit. Pleasant excitement. I want everything to go perfectly. The main thing is that we will be there together. The rest is not so important," he answered softly. Molly raised her glass. "Then let's drink. To the fact that we found each other," she said. They clinked glasses and sipped the sparkling wine. They were silent for a while, enjoying the moment. Finally, Molly smiled. "You know, if it weren't for that random evening at Alex's, we could have missed each other." "I thought about that too," Kyle replied. "You know, I wasn't going to go at first. It's good that Mark insisted." "Okay," she repeated softly, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes it feels like fate itself brought us together." That night, after Molly had fallen asleep, Kyle lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling. Memories flashed through his head, not bitter ones, but like fragments of someone else's movie. Here he was, in an expensive suit, standing at the altar with Bree at his first wedding, young, full of hope, and not at all sure of what lay ahead. And tomorrow he would walk down the aisle again, and this time there was not a drop of doubt or anxiety in his heart, only joy and trepidation. He quietly thanked fate for a second chance and closed his eyes, knowing that a wonderful day awaited him. The long-awaited day had arrived. Early in the morning, the sun was already gilding the surface of Lake Sammamish, where the final preparations were in full swing. White chairs for the guests were set out on the green lawn, and the altar was decorated with flower garlands. The air was filled with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Kyle stood off to the side with Mark, looking around and trying to stop his hands from shaking. He was dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, a small white rose pinned to his lapel. Mark straightened his tie and grinned. "Calm down, friend. You're the hero of the day today." "I'm calm as it is," Kyle muttered, though his heart was pounding. "I just can't believe it's all real." Mark patted him on the shoulder. "It's very real. Look, your parents are waving." Kyle looked over to where his mom and dad were standing behind the guest rows. They had flown in 2 days before the event and had already met Molly. His mom was blowing him a kiss, wiping away tears of joy. He smiled and waved back. A photographer was bustling about, setting up his camera, and a few curious ducks were strutting along the lake shore, watching the people. The musicians began to play a light melody, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The guests took their seats. Kyle took his place at the altar under the snow-white arch and exhaled, trying to focus on only one thing, waiting for her. Molly walked down the aisle to the sound of a violin. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. She wore a graceful white floor-length gown, her hair in soft curls, and she carried a small bouquet of lavender roses. She walked arm in arm with her father, who led her solemnly to the groom. Molly met Kyle's gaze, and her eyes were filled with love and joy. Kyle felt tears welling up on his own, but he was not ashamed of them. Molly's father passed her hand to Kyle, patting him on the shoulder and stepping aside. The bride and groom were now face to face. Behind Molly, her mother was quietly sobbing with happiness, and next to her, Kyle's mother was already getting out a handkerchief. Mark stood to the right of the groom, beaming a wide smile. The master of ceremonies spoke the required words about the union of hearts, about love and support. Kyle listened, but the meaning reached him as if through cotton wool. His entire being was absorbed by the girl in front of him, the very one who in seconds would become his wife. He imperceptibly squeezed her hand a little tighter, and Molly nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "I'm here. Everything is fine." The moment for the exchange of vows had arrived. By mutual agreement, they decided to say a few words to each other in their own words. Molly spoke first. Her voice trembled with emotion at first, but then grew stronger. "Kyle, a year ago, I couldn't even imagine how my life would change. You entered it quietly, without pathos, and became the one I always dreamed of. You are kind, reliable, and sincere. With you, I feel safe and surrounded by love. I promise to be with you in everything in joy and difficulties, to share every moment with you. I love you with all my heart." Kyle could barely contain his emotions as he listened to these simple and honest words. When it was his turn, he pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket the night before he had decided to write it down so as not to lose his train of thought in this exciting moment. He took a breath and began. "Molly, I used to think that I had already experienced love, but only with you did I understand what it really is. You showed me that relationships can be full of respect, warmth, and light. Thanks to you, I became a better person and learned to believe in myself again. I promise to be your support, the joy of every day, to listen to you and hear you. In front of our loved ones, I swear to love you all my life and cherish our happiness. Thank you for being there." Molly burst into tears before he finished speaking. Kyle himself could feel his voice tremble. The master of ceremonies nodded, accepting the vows, and asked to exchange rings. Mark placed a small ring with a shining stone in Kyle's palm just in time. Kyle slipped it onto Molly's slender finger, then she did the same with his ring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the host solemnly proclaimed. To a round of applause, Kyle leaned over and kissed his wife. It was a short kiss, but so sincere that the guests clapped even louder. One of his friends whistled loudly. Molly, laughing through her tears, hugged him. The petal-filled firecrackers burst all around them, raining pink onto them. Kyle looked at the faces of those gathered. All the loved ones were their parents, friends, even a couple of colleagues. Everyone was happy about their happiness, and he, too, was beaming with happiness. A thought flashed through his head. This is it, the very beginning of a new life that I have been working towards for so long. The rest of the day was filled with smiles, congratulations, a photo shoot against the backdrop of a sunset lake, a first dance to a favorite song, a touching toast from Mark in which he joked that he had never seen the groom so happy, and an endless feeling of grace. A three-tiered cake sparkled on the festive table. Guests raised glasses of champagne to the newlyweds. When, closer to midnight, the newlyweds were finally alone, Kyle, tiredly taking off his jacket, jokingly asked Molly, "Well, Mrs. Peterson, how do you feel?" Molly, adjusting a loose curl, smiled brightly. "Wonderful, Mr. Peterson." They laughed and kissed again. This wedding was nothing like the lavish celebration Kyle had had the first time. It was more modest, more soulful, but he wouldn't trade a single second of that day. There was a woman next to him who loved him sincerely and for whom he was ready to move mountains. A year has passed since that sunny summer day when Kyle and Molly swore eternal love to each other. Their first anniversary was warm and quiet. They decided to celebrate it far from the bustle of the city. They rented a small house on the ocean coast in Oregon. There, to the sound of the surf, they enjoyed each other's company, remembering how rich and happy this year was. That evening, Kyle lit a fire right on the beach. The orange light danced on their faces. Molly settled down next to him, wrapped in a blanket, and he put his arm around her shoulders. In the distance, the sun was setting slowly over the water, painting the sky in peaches and purples. "Remember this time last year, we were spinning on the dance floor?" Molly smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Of course. I thought I was dreaming and I was afraid to wake up, Kyle replied. And now I'm absolutely sure it's real. He touched her hair with his lips. They had become even closer over the past year. Sharing a life, traveling, planning, everything came easy to them. And although there were minor difficulties, a faucet would burst, Molly would stay late at work before the project's release, they always supported each other. Kyle received another promotion. He was appointed to lead an entire group on a new promising project. Molly also achieved success, becoming a leading product manager and earning the respect of her colleagues. But most importantly, their home was filled with love and peace. They rented a new, spacious apartment overlooking the park, thinking about the future, about the children they were planning to have in a couple of years. Barney, their cat, would be lazily lounging by the fireplace if they were home. It seemed like life itself was smiling at them. Molly turned slightly, looking into his eyes in the semi-darkness. Thank you, Kyle. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. For what? For making me happy. For this year, the best of my life, she said quietly. I used to think that after everything I've been through, I wouldn't be able to trust a man like that anymore. But you showed me that true love exists. Kyle felt the familiar warm lump in his throat at her words. He pulled Molly closer. And I am grateful to you. You changed my life. Before, I admit, I had lost faith that I could be needed by someone not for money or benefit. But you fell in love with me simply because I exist. Molly smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Well, you're also very cute, don't forget. Kyle laughed and lightly flicked her on the nose. Ah, so that's it. So it was self-interest, after all, that seduced the handsome young man. They joked some more, then fell silent, watching the sun finally disappear below the horizon, leaving a golden glow behind. The waves rolled toward the shore, crunching the pebbles, the fire crackled. Kyle looked ahead, where the sky met the ocean, and thought about the path he and Molly had taken. Once upon a time, he thought his life was ruined, betrayal, divorce, loneliness. But it turned out that new opportunities and new love were waiting for him around the corner. Now he understood, it is important to value yourself and not put up with what destroys you from the inside. Leaving a toxic relationship became his salvation, although at the time it was very painful. But after going through trials, he found much greater happiness than he could have imagined. Looking at Molly, who was enjoying the breeze with her eyes closed, Kyle felt an overwhelming tenderness. This was his family, his present and his future. He no longer thought about the past, it had lost its power over him. All the shadows had dissipated. Do you want to take a walk by the water? He asked quietly. Go ahead, she nodded. They stood up, leaving the blanket and empty glasses behind, and walked barefoot across the cool sand to the water's edge. Molly laced her fingers through his, pressing her side against him. Kyle walked, smiling. There was a lightness and calm in his chest. The endless future stretched out ahead, so inviting and no longer scary. He didn't know what the next years would bring them. Fate has its secrets. But he knew one thing for sure. Next to this woman, he was ready to face anything. After all, she gave him the most important thing, faith in himself and in love. And that meant his new life would be wonderful. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles inland, another woman was spending the evening alone. Bree sat in her tiny rented apartment, staring at her phone. On the table next to her sat a half-empty bottle of cheap wine and cold instant noodles, her dinner. She opened Instagram, scrolling through the feed under a fictitious account. From her real profile, she had long been blocked by everyone who had once been close to her. On the page of one of her former colleagues at the real estate agency, Bree came across a photo that made her heart ache. The picture showed familiar faces, a bride and groom surrounded by friends and family, beaming with happiness. She immediately recognized Kyle in the groom, although he had noticeably improved in appearance and looked even younger than his age. The bride was the same girl with whom he was apparently now happy. There were dozens of congratulatory comments under the photo. Bree read them through a veil of tears. She couldn't believe that just a year ago she had taken Kyle for granted in her life. Now he belonged to someone else, starting a new chapter where there was no place for her. Bree wiped away a tear. She tried to tell herself she had no regrets, but deep down, regret was gnawing at her. The last year had been a series of humiliations and disappointments. Her attempt to move and start over had failed. Without references and experience, sales were going poorly and debts were mounting. She had failed to achieve the fame and money she had so craved. And most importantly, there was no one left by her side. Turning off her phone, Bree looked around the empty room with peeling wallpaper. She had once lived in a luxurious apartment, and now she was huddled here. She suddenly wanted to rewind time, but nothing could be fixed. What she had destroyed with her actions could not be returned. In the silence, her new loneliness seemed deafening. Bree sighed, turned off the light, and lay down, burying her face in the pillow. There were no luxuries or lies left in her life, only bitter truths and long nights, thinking about the mistake she had made. This was her retribution. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.